Duncan is Ashridge accredited coach, and Ashridge is a place where the relational team coaching was born as a practice. And Duncan has been working with senior teams, board teams. He is a board member himself of the Executive Coaching Association. And your research, Duncan, has been also featured in publications such as Financial Times and Coaching at Work. So yes, these are a few elements which I wanted to share with the rest of the community, and it would be great to hear from you. What is it that brought you to relational team coaching space with the audience?
Absolutely, and just to actually acknowledge some of the comments about how people are landing today as well. So we've got a relaxed from Fabio. We've got a couple of curiouses from Saraswati and Heidi. Andre's still landing, so it's the middle of the day, having to switch focus. Mona's feeling a bit busy, and I just want to welcome all of that. And again, this leads me into answering your question, Egle, which is what attracted me to this approach. So when I first moved into the field of team coaching and team development, I would often follow approaches that were quite linear. So they'd say, well, to get to being a high-performing team, here's the process we need to go through. And we're going to collect some data. Then from that data, we're going to decide what to do. And we're going to do these steps. And out the other side, this team is going to be high-performing. And there was certainly some value in that approach. And I am not ignoring the value of collecting data, of having structure, of giving some kind of framing to the work that we're doing. But I noticed that approach felt limited, because actually the team was behavior, and what happens in a team is much more complex than a simple linear cause and effect process. And that one of the things that the work I was doing wasn't impacting was actually to really help people be able to understand, why are we producing these dynamics between us? Sometimes those more linear approaches might say, these people need to have a conversation, or these people need to address their conflict. But it wasn't actually understand why we even got to behaving this way. If we have a group of well-meaning, well-intentioned, well-skilled people, which most people, I think, in a workplace are. Occasionally, we might have people who might push the boundaries of that, but I think most people are that way. But yet, we're behaving in a way that is quite dysfunctional. And so when I came across the relational approach, and just to give you, say, an Ashridge view of relational approach, would include strands of Gestalt, of psychoanalytic thinking, and of systemic thinking. But the thing that ties all of them together is a notion that at the heart of a team coaching approach should be the relationship that I have as a coach to the team. And that by using myself as the kind of vehicle for being able to understand what might be happening to them, and then being able to work with them primarily on their relationships and their ways of working, that is what will stimulate the progression and some of the change that they might be hoping to see. And within that, I think the most impactful frame for me has been the psychoanalytic. And I'm sure many of you will be familiar with Freud. You might be familiar with ideas such as Melanie Klein's idea of splitting, how we might go and split kind of polarities into good and bad about the world. But what I hadn't really come to until I came across this was actually how this then applies to teams. And what is the collective unconscious? So what is it that leads people as a group into groupthink? What is it that leads, to give you an example of a team I worked with, I arrived, we arrived at their offsite day, and in the first 20 minutes while they were waiting for everyone to arrive, they sat around and just moaned about other departments. Now, previously, I would have taken that as, that's just they're a bit of a moany group, but actually there's something else that I think they're trying to communicate here in what's happening for them. Egle, is that enough of an answer to your question, and a bit of a wander around as well, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Duncan, for sharing. And building up on that, I would love to hear a little bit more your thoughts around the concept, which actually you suggested when we were kind of mapping out the title of the session. You said, Illuminating the Unspoken. This is what we're going to talk about. And I'm curious, how would you define that and illuminated the unspoken when we work with teams in team coaching setting? And why do you think it is so essential?
So one of the most impactful theories within this relational and within a psychoanalytic framework for me has been Bion's work, which worker Wilfred Bion, which looked at some of the ways in which anxiety derails us as groups. And that, to me, there's an endless depth to his theories. But within those is the idea that there is often a kind of an unspoken within a group, that because of certain emotions being painful or difficult to address or even to be able to admit to, we will try and deny them or suppress them. So when we're particularly anxious, say we've just had a major restructure and a team's feeling really anxious about our position, or when there might be some kind of competition or rivalry in the group, maybe one of them has just been promoted to lead the team, but some of their peers who went through the interview process didn't get the position, and there's some of that going on. That when this is happening, as groups and teams, we try to find ways to deny our anxiety or deny competition or deny any kind of seemingly negative group emotion. And that in there, part of my role is often to help the team illuminate what is unspoken or difficult to address here. So to go back to the team at that offsite, my intervention there was actually just to give them a noticing, to say, I notice that you've spent these last 20 minutes talking about some of these different functions and complaining about them. And I'm wondering, how is it to be, they were an internal function. How is it to be your function in this organization? How do you feel seen? How do you feel treated? And they got into a discussion with each other about it a bit. And I said, one hypothesis of mine is that you start critiquing other functions because actually you don't feel respected or you don't feel validated. So I was helping them illuminate something unspoken that hopefully could then lead them later in the day to start thinking about actually, what do we need to do differently in how we work with other functions? And how can we become aware when we're going off into some of our anxieties instead of finding ways to address them?
What a powerful intervention, Duncan, to notice and then share hypothesis, which is kind of backed by potentially a theory behind. We actually have people kind of, starting to share their questions or comments on the chat. And there was one from Candice asking to share Wilfred's full name. So that would be great if you could share. And I would like just to take a moment to invite you, audience, to really, if you have any questions or comments, the way how we are thinking that we are going to run the first half an hour is very conversational, the dialogue. If you have any questions, observations, what you would like to share, you can use the chat or just raise your hand and kind of ask the question. So that would be the first part of the session. And then, towards maybe in 15 or 20 minutes, we will invite you to go into the breakout rooms. We'll share the prompt to deepen the conversation further, and then come back to the main group and see what emerges. So that would be.
Well, I think I could see Candice's hand go up first, and then Matthew was about half a second after her. So hello, Candice.
Hello, good morning. How is everyone? I'm assuming well. The question that I had, because I think it's very courageous of you to approach it from this perspective. But I do think it leaves you extremely vulnerable, which is where we can grow as well. But because you are picking out, so to speak, the elephant in the room, how do you go about facilitating that in a way that it doesn't just become a conversation that is filled with gossip? Because I know I've seen things and I'm like, oh, I'm just going to veer over here instead. So how do you navigate that so that you have it somewhat controlled where it doesn't get too heated, or does it get too heated? And if it does, how do you bring it back?
Yeah, thank you, Candice. Great questions. And you're right. This, sometimes it can feel quite challenging work to be doing, because I'm not coming in and saying we'll do this, and this, and everything will be fine out at the end. And it, no matter how practiced I get, at times it feels very anxiety provoking and uncertain. But my reason for that still comes back to my core belief that all teams, all groups are emergent. Even now, as a group of us who've been together 17, 18 minutes, we are emerging. As you start to, you look at your video screen, you get a sense of me, of Egle, of the other 24, 25 people on here. We start to then subtly recalibrate our sense of what's permissible in this group. And the more information that's brought in, the more that starts to shift as well. So to answer your question, Candice, or to hopefully answer it, the first part is, as you will all know, the contracting, and being clear with them that actually, typically, I think teams come because they have business needs, which might be operational, often strategic as well, but there's something around their performance. And I have to be clear at the start that my way of helping you do that is by helping you understand more of how you are working together. And within that, I understand that we will need some structure. I don't say, yeah, just turn up for the day and whatever happens. But that within that work, how we spend time pausing and reflecting on what is happening between us is absolutely crucial. So Candice, I will bring that in really quite slowly at the start. And what Egle refers to as hypotheses, I'll hold them very lightly. So I might not come in and say, Candice, what you've said there's really controversial. What was everyone else making of it too early? But I might say, who else sees this as Candice has seen it? And who else is seeing it in a different light? So yeah, it has to be quite gentle at the start, but you're continually treading the edge between, if it's not challenging enough, it's not, to me, a service to them. But if it's too much, people retreat. So it's a calibration, and I don't always get it right. Does that answer, Candice?
It does. It sounds like it's tricky, and I was just wondering if you had it all mapped out. But I'm glad that you don't, because that means that I don't have to either. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
And anyone who tells you they've got this approach mapped out is a charlatan, in my opinion. Matthew, hello.
Hi, how you doing? When you started talking about approaches and theories from other people and stuff like that, therapy just popped straight into my mind. And it comes back to something a friend of mine said to me when I told him a few years back that I was thinking of trying this coaching crack. And he said, don't let it change you. So my question, or if it's clear enough, is if you're just looking at a process or learning from what other people have done, are you losing a bit of yourself or leaving a bit of yourself out of the room if you just don't go in and trust your own insights and intuition, as opposed to trying to make it too much about a process? Does that make sense?
It does, Matthew. And that to me is why this approach has appealed to me so much, because actually it's around how we bring ourselves into the room, so that in the way that Egle might have said at the start, she felt a bit anxious being here and having to coordinate these events and having to lead them and make them work. Actually, that's the same, it's the same for me when I'm team coaching, Matthew. actually, how do I bring, who I am into this group, so that actually, if I'm working, say, with a very international group, what does it mean for me to be the Brit in that group? Or if I'm working with a male dominated or a female dominated team, what might be happening for me there? And am I willing to bring that in? So as an example, I was working with 3 founders in a financial services partnership, or they were the 3 founding partners. And I noticed that 2 men and 1 woman, and I noticed that the 2 men were quite competitive with each other, and I was a bit competitive with them. And previously, I would have held that back because I don't want to admit that. I look weak, I look a bit stupid. Maybe I'll put their back up, I look petty. But actually, I thought, you know what, I'm going to say this. And, partway through the team coaching, I said, I noticed that when I'm speaking to you, the female partner, I notice that we follow on from each other in our dialogue. But I notice that when I'm speaking to you two, the 2 men, we don't really build off each other. We pretend to be building off each other, but actually we're still trying to slightly outdo each other and score points. And I feel a bit competitive with you. And there was a pause and a couple of awkward glances. And then one of them started laughing and said, yeah. They said, that's our industry all over. Everyone competes with each other. We're always fighting each other, etc., etc. And it kind of opened something else. So hopefully, Matthew, what I'm trying to demonstrate there is actually we can bring ourselves in. And to your friend's comment, don't let coaching change you. I'd always say good luck.
How could it not?
How could it
for,
not?
For the better. But I'm glad that you said yourself, because when people start to just rely on a process, they leave their own uniqueness out of the equation, and that's a big loss for their client as well as them.
And Matthew, I think it also means that in this approach, we can bring in whoever we might be. So actually, some people in the space of coaching facilitation might be quite extroverted. Some people might be quite quiet. And actually, we can team coach both really well from either of those perspectives to see what they bring to a team in any given space.
Thank you, Matthew, for a question, and Duncan for the response. What a great way to illustrate the use of self in the coaching process. And we have another question from Andrea. Andrea, are you open to just unmute yourself and share? It's about the readiness of the team.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
You gave a nice example of explaining what you noticed in a team. With that, I assume you have been working with that team before. So how do you establish actually that they trust you and that the team is really open to receive coaching or share the information with you?
I think so much of that is still picked up in those, our opening noticings of how we make contact with the organization. Even before we might get to the team, if we're being approached by the HR director or the L&D director or the team leader, what's their approach to us? So I had a team I started working with very recently, and this email came through, the team leader hasn't been able to find anyone to help them. Can you help? And they've only got half an hour and they're really busy, but they need it to be really impactful. And immediately that data is making me think, what is going on here? What's that space? And then being able to explore that, being able to ask that with a team leader. And they were a global team and a large team, really moving into being a kind of larger group, because I think there were 13 of them coming to the event. And we organized a couple of calls because they were so spread out globally, just to be able to introduce me, to hear about, what they'd like to accomplish there. And then even that data is already helping me be able to see and being able to feed back, with the team lead and with them, how ready are we? What's their capacity for this? And that early on actually tempered some of the ambition that, the team leader was saying, we need to use this event to accelerate where we are and the development of us as a global function. And I had to say, actually, a lot of these people have never even met each other. That's a massive ambition, and that's probably not going to happen. And to that, Andre, I think there's also the truth that actually at one level we can establish their readiness, and at another, it's often not until we get into the work that what might be presented on the outside, we're quite a harmonious team, we know our vision and our mission, and we've got these KPIs to get to, and then we get in the room and we've heard all of this, but then we get in the room and we go, something doesn't feel right. Like they're really polite with each other, or they keep on jumping about on topics, or they pay superficial attention to lots of things, but actually, do we really think that anyone's going to do anything out of this conversation? So I think there's as much as you can do in a setup, Andre, and there's the truth that what then happens, in contact can be sometimes quite surprising.
Okay, thank you, Duncan.
Thank you, Andrea and Duncan. There is one more question from Candice about the tools, activities which you might use in the group in order to aid to kind of illuminating that unspoken. Would you have any suggestions, Duncan?
So the way I typically set up team sessions with them would be to say, you bring either your key operational challenges, your key strategic challenges to the work. So there is a very clear something we are working on here. So as that example, that global function, they were bringing to that 2-day offsite, who do we want to be? How do we develop as an internal function with an expanding business? How do we develop a global talent strategy? And what are some of the key kind of key hires and within the structuring of the division that we might make over 12 months? So I invite them to have that as a start point. We need to have something we are working on, and then within that to think about how we go about doing that. So Candice, when I'm thinking about tools, one example there was I invited them to answer the question in small groups. How is the system and the organization within which we work impacting us as a team? And to just work in a couple of small groups, put those, put post-its on flip charts, just to be able to draw out all of the information within that group of how they felt their system was impacting how they work. And I appreciate that a lot of you on this call will be very familiar, because I think it might be perhaps the kind of best known form of team coaching right now, systemic team coaching, which draws on, the idea of being able to understand stakeholder perspectives and bring them into the room. What I was doing there was working with that, but bringing some of that kind of group unconscious lens to it, of actually, how is that stakeholder universe then affecting our behavior and what is happening between us? And obviously I had to give them, an example. I said, well, one of the things I presuming is happening, your exco is demanding that you go for a big corporate transaction in 2.5 years' time. How is that impacting you as a team? So it's, it's sometimes kind of, they have to kind of pause and think about it for a moment. But as an example, Candice, what I'm trying to do there is, bring that to light, to illuminate why might we be behaving in the way that we are as a. And I think the other big tool I would say from this is the hypothesis. So very, early on, once I've kind of made contact with the initial sponsor or sponsors, the team leader, perhaps the kind of the people team, maybe I've met a couple of the members of the team, I will then try and draw up a hypothesis of what I think might be happening for this team in this situation. And I'll try and draw up a hypothesis that might be a little different to what they're saying. Because what they're telling me might be something that's kind of known. So they might say, an example at global function, our role here is to perform this function in this organization. We've got these things to work on. We've got these big deals. We've got to do this, etc. And actually, my hypothesis underneath was that really they didn't feel very much like a leadership team at all. That quite a few of them didn't even see the need to be a leadership team. It didn't mean anything to them. And that for 4 or 5 of them, there probably was a team dynamic, and for the rest of them, there wasn't. And yet they felt some urge to come and work together in that space. And then to help them think about actually what is the tension within this business of how much do we need these kind of global identities, and how much can we work quite effectively sometimes in our regional identity. So by drawing up a loosely held hypothesis, Candice, then I could bring some of that back to the team leader, start to feed it in at the offsite as well. So hopefully I've answered your question of a couple of examples of tools.
Thank you, Duncan, and kind of, sharing some of the examples to illustrate how the hypothesis might potentially kind of challenge some of the thinking or narrative in the team, and potentially kind of surface what's beneath. Barry, you have a question on the chat, and I wonder, would you mind to unmute yourself and share your thoughts and question? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Egle, and hi, Duncan. I suppose Matthew's question and your reply prompted me to ask my question, which is based lightly on Bill O'Brien's quote, the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener, which I would subscribe to. And I was just wondering, what practices you do or would recommend to support whatever stance it is that you intend to take before you're doing a team coaching session. And I'm thinking around impartiality, whilst, Matthew agrees with your view on bringing yourself into the session, to be able to do that in a supportive, unbiased way.
Thanks, Barry. And I can't necessarily say kind of, in the moment or in the hour before a session, because that's always, and then again, how is my journey? How is my arrival perhaps even reflective of what might be happening in the team? If I've had quite a stressful or challenging journey, or I turn up really foggy, how often that can mirror also what's happening in that team space. But to think about our longer term development in such work, if that's part of what you're asking as well, is it Barry? I'm turning by that nodding, has been the seeking out of developmental but challenging group work for myself. So that has included doing my master's in team coaching at Ashridge. You will see it listed on their website as exec, but you can do the first year in team, and I then did my dissertation in team. I did a 6-month certificate in board dynamics at the Tavistock. I've done a lot of family constellations and organizational constellations. And I think all of that, and particularly with Ashridge and the Tavistock, there's quite a lot of group process in there. And if anyone hasn't done group process, that's often we will just hold an open space in the group for, say, 45 minutes or an hour. And we'll see what emerges, what is said and what isn't said. And this, could be an incredible lens for who am I in groups and teams? And how do I build that reflexivity of even being able to understand what do these mean to me? What do they signify, etc. So I would say to that, Barry, again, just continually going out and finding what are those forums that I can develop my, my understanding, my thinking about what that means. And then even this weekend, funny enough, I wasn't going to it for a group development perspective, but I've been, I'm going to be volunteering with a charity next. And we had a training weekend for kind of 12 or 13 volunteers. And even there, I was thinking about who am I in this group? What's my tendency to want to look smart here? What's my need to be seen? There's a moment when people were giving each other positive feedback from the first day. And 4 or 5 people have been chosen and I hadn't yet. And I could start to feel kind of the very young boy in me being like, am I going to get picked? Am I going to get picked, for the sports team, or am I going to be acknowledged, etc. So what I would say, keep on going and finding, and to use my supervisor's example, and she won't treat this as confidential because she shares it openly, group therapy as well. I never found, wherever I was living, I never quite found a space to do it. I would love to have gone and done some of that. I think that'd be really, really helpful.
Thanks, Duncan.
Thank you for asking and sharing, Duncan. We have still some time for a breakout room if if the audience agrees. One of the big interventions, and it kind of surfaced in this conversation in relational approach, is using self as an instrument, using your own emotions, your own thoughts, intuition. And in the next maybe 8 minutes in the breakout room, what would be great is actually to invite you to reflect with a peer in the breakout room, which emotions or thoughts or intuitions you could bring more fully into the work of teams. And kind of, if you could have a conversation, then we can come back and reflect further, what emerged in those sessions. Sounds good, everyone? Yeah. So the question is, what emotions, thoughts, or intuitions you could bring more fully into the work with teams? Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed the conversations. If you're willing, just use the chat to share what came up in those discussions. What were the emotions or thoughts or feelings, what intuition, how you might use it, what came up, or feel free to unmute if you have any follow-up questions. So we have this kind of free space to continue the conversation.
Yes, Saraswati, hello.
Thank you. And I take the liberty, with permission from Andy and from Neil, to speak on our behalf. Thank you. So what we actually spoke about is how do you call it out? That was the theme that we spoke about. And the reason why that came up was depending on how you're feeling. So your interior state, which is enabling or not enabling you to do what you need to do. And I think a couple of things that came up was having the courage to be able to call it out. And the courage is actually combined with the fact that what is your intention? What's the impact you want to leave? And therefore, how should you align your behavior? And the third thing that came up was do it right up when it shows. And I know, Neil from our group said he would do it right up in the beginning as an almost like an agreement, like a contract. But definitely don't miss it when it shows up, because that's also in a way you are setting the norms of how we show up as as a team here. So I think that's the other one that came up for us. And finally, I think we spoke about how do you using something as physical as an elephant, stuffed toy possibly, they're available. When somebody will point out and say, what is that doing here? What is that meant to be? So I think these were the few things that we spoke about. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, first, I love that idea, Saraswati, actually. I might go and buy a stuffed elephant to bring along. I really like that. I might nick that.
All credit to Andy.
Thank you, Andy, then. Secondly, the point about how we contract for this, actually, I didn't mention earlier. One of the ways I will set up at the start of working with a team, and even come back to in future sessions, is just to ask them, to say, one of the ways I work at times, I would like to give you my observations of what is happening for you as a team. Perhaps I might even be guessing about what you find difficult to say or what might be happening for some of you. Do I have your permission? Hands up, do I have your permission to do that? And so I am getting, some kind of agreement to that there. And then to your first point, Saraswati, which was about the how do we go about doing that? And I think it's, I'm going to give an analogy about something that I was never any good at, which is playing the piano. But I watch my father is a great pianist, and I see you ever watch someone play a piano. Actually, sometimes the movements are very, very delicate, and other times it's da 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 da. And I think it's that, and it's for me the ongoing journey of expanding my and our toolbox. What's our ability to just come in very subtly, and it might just be a prompt, just to be able to, someone saying, yeah, I think I'm kind of on board with that, and being able to say, but if you were to share the part of you that isn't on board, it's quite gentle, or what do you mean by that, or who exactly are you addressing this to? And then sometimes the da 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 da, actually I noticed that in this room, 4 of you seem to hold the discussion and do the talking, and the other 3 seem, peripheral or like you're observers. And I don't say that to put any of the 7 of you under the spotlight, but to draw your attention to something is happening within this team that means that 4 people's voice are dominant, 3 people aren't heard. And I'm wondering what that might be about. And if you were really going to be brave, I'd invite you to discuss that between you. And all I would say, as an example from that intervention, Saraswati, there, when you're making a da-da-da-dun, if we're waiting to feel comfortable or calm enough to do it, I probably won't do it. Actually, it's when, I feel the palms sweaty, when a bit of me's going, oh my God, I don't know if I want to say that. They might not like it. Oh, but I still sense that actually there is something valuable here. I'm not just saying it to be controversial. I know there's something valuable here. And then we have to, and to bring it in. So to that old cliche of a bit of the feel the fear and do it anyway type moment. Yes. Candice, hello again.
Hello. I have a question based off of what you've all said. Okay, so when you go into that space, I know that depending on what environment you're in, sometimes a certain part of your personality can come out or you can adjust. So when you are in an environment such as you've described, how do you, or is there even a way to ensure that their true personality comes out? Because we can change a climate, but they also might have different sides of them. So they're very calm, maybe they're not speaking, but normally they're the chatterbox, or very aggressive. is there a way to draw that part of the unspoken out, or do we just are we just going with what we see and then it comes out later? I'm not sure if the question can be answered, but that was what was running through my head. So
I think, well, I slightly question the idea of when you say their true self. Just from my perspective as a practitioner, I don't believe there is a single true self. I believe we have multiple selves that get activated in different environments. So, you know, you may see me here perhaps as being in a slightly more, you know, presenter mode, being a bit more facilitative. But then on that training weekend that I've just been on, actually, I wasn't really doing much of that at all. Sometimes I'd sit back in the group. So I think there's multiple selves at play. But one way I'll try and do that, Candice, is to start, you know, some team time together. I might ask something like, ask them to share with each other, how is it to be me in this team right now? So that they immediately move into the more relational space, because we do the typical, you know, how are we arriving today? Most people, myself included, and that's after years of group work, don't answer that very fluently. Because we're like, yeah, I'm okay, I'm fine. Or we then describe, well, I had a train hiccup and I had that. It's like superficial information, really. How is it to be me in this team right now? And it doesn't, I could answer it quite, you know, safely and superficially. I could go into some more depth about that. But I think, Candice, that it's simply about bringing to the team's awareness, how is the conditions in which this team operates affecting the team, and how is this team dynamic in affecting us as individuals, and which selves might be brought through in that as well.
thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. I just can't believe the hour just flew by. We have 3 minutes left for all of us in the space. Duncan, I wanted to appreciate your presence and joining us and sharing your insights and stories. It was lovely to connect in this capacity. I wanted to share Duncan's LinkedIn kind of link. So if you want to continue the chat with Duncan, you can connect there. I know that you also, Duncan, mentioned that there are a few books which you would like to share with the audience, so we can do it as a follow-up email. I'm happy to kind of pick up.
I've just put them in the chat, actually. So these are 3 of my favorite books in this space, and they've got brilliant case studies, because that's how I think you really learn this approach. Actually, thinking about the different ways you can bring yourself, you can bring your hypotheses, your ways of noticing, your ways of stimulating dialogue into that space. Go and find those forms of group development as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing this. And Duncan, appreciate your time. Appreciate joining this conversation. And for the rest of the group, thank you for joining and engaging session dialogue, which we had and co-created. There is a lineup of upcoming sessions too in the next 3 months. If you want to check, that's on www.teamcoachingcircle.com.